Hello there, and welcome to my first video on walking the Pennine Way. You'll notice I'm not in front of the old Nag's Head at Edale. I'm actually still down in the far west of Cornwall. During lockdown, I took the opportunity to look at virtually every video I could find on YouTube about the Pennine Way. If you've recorded a video on the Pennine Way, I've probably watched it. And obviously I realise that you're all going to be much better at it than I am, since I only just started doing videos. So I'm trying to find a unique selling point for my videos, and it's going to be being an old man on the Pennine Way again. I don't claim to be the youngest person to have done the Pennine Way. I'm certainly not the oldest, but there probably aren't that many people doing the Pennine Way this summer who did it a year after it opened in 1967. So I've entitled all these videos An Old Man on the Pennine Way Again. I'm going to do two preliminary videos, one looking at kit. Since everybody seems to do a video looking at kit, mine's probably going to be a little different to most of them because all my kit in those days, or to you now, would be 60 years old. So the rucksacks and tents are all very different. So I'm going to do one picking out the differences in the kit just as a trial to see if I can do this. The second one is going to be the first day on the Pennine Way, because I am going to do the Pennine Way, but because of the way the way has changed over the past 50-60 years, it's 54 years in fact, I won't be doing the leg this time that I did the very first time, because I was one of the poor unfortunates that went over the top of Kinder when the peat gruffs were all open. So the first, or the second video I'm going to do is just looking at our first day. I took a number of photos on our trip, not as many as you might take now, but I'm going to try and recreate all those photos as we go along. So the first day, since I'm not going to go past any of the spots, won't be recreating those photos, but I'll put them up on the screen to show you what it was like for us as we ended up in Ashop Clough. I just want to talk for a little while about the maps. My guess is that everyone going on the Pennine Way now uses the Explorer series, which used to be called the Leisure series, Outdoor Leisure series. They are superb maps. The Pennine Way is clearly marked as a green line with diamonds on it, so you can't miss it. It is very clear. But more importantly, when you get into the agricultural areas, all the field boundaries are marked as well. So you can go along a road and say, I have to go past 3 field boundaries, and then the path will branch off to the left, and you know exactly where to look. So in lowland areas, field boundaries are very important. Cicerone have taken these maps, sliced them up and bound them into a book, which makes it very easy to use. You can put that in a map case and have it with you all the time. When we were doing our dissertation at university, we were told not to tax the concertina playing abilities of our examiners by including lots of fold-out maps. If you've ever tried to use one of these maps on the hills in the high wind, particularly if you've got it, they are double-sided, so particularly if you have it open on the wrong side, you will find out exactly how difficult it is to use at high level. Unfortunately, that's the first of the outdoor leisure series that was ever produced, the Dark Peak, and it wasn't produced till 1972. So it wasn't available when we did the Pennine Way. The next map down is the Land Ranger 1 to 50,000 series. They are quite detailed, they show quite a lot of detail, and the Pennine Way is marked, and this time as a red line with red diamonds on it. So you can follow the route on this, but it doesn't have any field boundaries on it. So as soon as you get into agricultural areas, you're having to guess which side of field boundaries the path goes. That was again not produced until 72 or 74. So the only maps that we had available to us in 67 were the 1 inch to 1 mile. These are an even smaller scale than the Land Ranger maps, so there's less detail on them. The Pennine Way isn't actually marked. Very occasionally you'll see things like Pennine Way undefined. That means that you probably shouldn't expect to see it on the ground. My guess is that nowadays you could probably find it because many of them have been slabbed, but in those days it wasn't actually easy to find the maps in high ground. That wasn't actually so important in high ground because it didn't particularly matter if you got off the path. But as soon as you get into an agricultural area, these were very poor for finding your way. And in many respects, the signposting in those days wasn't as good as it is now, that I've seen from videos. So it was actually quite easy to get off the path in agricultural areas. If you wanted a more detailed view, OS did produce 1 to 25,000 sheets, which are exactly the same scale as the Explorer series, but they only come in small sheets, so that's 10 kilometres from the bottom to the top of that map, and that means for the whole of the Pennine Way you would need at least 40 sheets, 40 different sheets, which was unobtainable for most people. So most people, well, everybody used the 1 inch to 1 mile map. I just want to go on to and think about the guidebooks that we used. In those days it was never very easy to get a book in the first place. Nowadays I would go onto Amazon, 2 clicks later the book's ordered and it arrives through my letterbox the next day, even though I live miles from anywhere in Cornwall. In those days I had to go to a bookshop and ask them were there any books on the Pennine Way, and of course they couldn't look through the computer catalogue because it didn't exist. They had to look through a typed sheet of all the books that were available, or a printed sheet of all the books that there were available, and order whichever one, whichever name seemed appropriate. So, to the best of my knowledge, this is the book that we actually used, the guidebook that I used. It's this is a first edition AP Binns, Walking the Pennine Way, and I recognised a couple of the phrases in it which confirmed to me that it was the book I actually used. There's a lovely bit at the end where, coming down from the Cheviots, he says, "You were seized by the compulsion to run." And I have to say, we mentioned at the time that we had no compulsion to run down from the Cheviots at that stage of the walk. Anyway, this is a book we used. It doesn't have very good maps in it. I'll try and find one. I'll put one up on the screen so you can see which one I'm looking at. So, looking at the first day, it shows you the route that goes up Grindsbrook, across the top of Kinder, heading to the west of Crowden Head, and to the downfall, and then along to Mill Hill. It's impossible from this map to work out on the 1-inch Ordnance Survey map where you have to go. The detail on the Ordnance Survey map isn't good enough, and it's not a good enough map to just transpose. So at no stage did we have a line on a map which we could follow. The Ordnance Survey didn't put lines on the maps. They mentioned things like Pennine Way undefined, and that meant that the Pennine Way went there somewhere, but it wasn't on the ground, you couldn't see it on the ground, and they couldn't mark it. That was usually a sort of forerunner of disaster, since you didn't know where you were meant to be and where you were going. What they used to do was to tell you at a certain gate, go left, at the next, or the second next gate, go right. And that was fine if you got the right gate in the first place, but if you made a mistake anywhere, you then had no idea where you were, because you could have followed 7 or 8 instructions which were in the wrong place. So route finding was a real problem, coupled with this 1-inch Ordnance Survey map not having field boundaries. So we actually didn't know which field we were in at any particular time. It wasn't really, to the best of my knowledge, until Wainwright produced his pictorial guide that you could pick this up, and you could either use this to find your way on the Pennine Way, or you could transpose details from these maps onto your own better map. So as far as I know, that was the first decent guide that came out, but that came out in that he was doing it in '67 when we were doing the Pennine Way, so that wasn't available to us. Subsequently, things like the Trailblazer guides and Cicerone have produced what I think are brilliant guides, and you could actually find your way on the Pennine Way. I can follow this in my mind now, so you could use this to find your way quite well on the Pennine Way, probably without having the map, although we will have the maps, or I will have the map when I try again. Before I start, I'm going to apologise for the quality of the photographs. They were all taken on slides, and after we moved house down to Cornwall, they were stored in a shed, and they actually went mouldy. So I've spent quite a lot of time cleaning them up, both the slides themselves and digitally in Photoshop. They're not very good still, but they're the best I've got. The tent was hired from the local council. It was a Duke of Edinburgh type tent, and it wasn't in particularly good order anyway. It was made of canvas. The tent was canvas and the fly sheet was canvas. The problem is that canvas is quite heavy for both of them, and they're heavy when they're dry, but when they get wet they are really heavy. The first 3 days the tent was wet, so it just added to the amount of weight you're carrying. The other problem we had with the tent was the ground sheet. They were thick plastic with a nylon weave in them, but it leaked, and if you've listened to the second video in the series, you'll find that we woke up in the morning in about ½ an inch of water inside the tent. So it wasn't really a good start to the Pennine Way. One of the other things that we hired from the council was a primer stove. I don't know how many people use primer stoves nowadays. I have still used a primer stove camping, but they aren't the sort of thing that you can just set up and light. It takes some sort of level of knowledge. So you end up with a kit of parts every morning or every night. You take that off, the reservoir is full of paraffin, and you have to screw the burner in. And tighten it up with the special spanner they provide, which weighs quite a lot. You end up with, you put in the supports for the pans and the diffuser that goes on the top. It's like that. They provide a little pot, little tin, so that is full of paraffin. They provide a tin of methylated spirits, which you put in that trough there and light it. After a couple of minutes, that has heated all this up sufficiently to vaporize the paraffin coming there. Once that's hot enough and vaporizing the paraffin, you can then pump this up and you get a roaring flame. If you pump that up before it's hot enough, it won't vaporize the paraffin and you get liquid paraffin coming out of the burner. And you get a paraffin flame, which can be a metre high. That's okay outside, but inside a tent it's a bit more of a problem. And I was on a outward bound course and we were camping underneath the main face of Scawfell in a place called Hollowstones in the snow. I'll put a picture up of a black and white picture up of the campsite. And I was outside the tent just actually looking at the sunset. It was March and one of the tents lit up very brightly and a flaming primer stove flew out through the door. So they'd pumped it too early. They'd had their 1 metre high flame of paraffin inside the tent, and the easy way to get rid of it was to throw it out through the door. So primuses were, you had to understand them and you had to know how to use them. I'll put up a picture of the Black's camping catalogue to show you what stoves were available, and you see there were very few stoves that were actually available. And this was the only one that was you could easily guarantee getting fuel for. They had started producing gas camping stoves, but very few people carried fuel for it, so we had no idea whether we could get fuel. Next morning, when you've finished breakfast, you have to let it cool down, take it all to pieces, and I'll say this advisedly, you make sure that all your bits and pieces go in. We didn't carry it in a tin, we carried it in a bag, but you have to make sure you get all your bits and pieces in the bag. That may give you some idea as to what's going to happen later on in our Pennine Way. Okay, so that's the stoves. The sleeping bags we hired off the county. They were pretty good sleeping bags actually, down. And so after they were soaking wet after the first night and they weren't very warm then. But after we dried them out, they were absolutely fine and we never had any problem sleeping. We'll move on to the rucksack, again hired from the council. If you look at the picture, which is a cutout of the sitting outside Tanhill Inn, you'll see that they are ex-army, quite old ex-army rucksacks. The straps had all curled round into very thin tubes, so I'd put a felt pad inside mine, and you can see that's the grey thing that's going up the front or the back of it. They actually came with large lumps of foam rubber attached to stick under your shoulders. You'll notice there's no waist belt of any description, so they just hung onto your shoulders. They were extremely uncomfortable, but that's what rucksacks were in those days. Looking at the catalogue for the time, there are no other rucksacks apart from this sort of thing. For pots and pans, we used ex-army mess tins. I'd used them earlier on that year in an Outward Bound course, but they were aluminium, and I couldn't get aluminium from our ex-army stores. I could only get steel. So we had 2 steel mess tins. This actually is a photo taken below Stanage Edge when we went there climbing one day. And suffice to say, we both forgot to bring mugs. So one of us was drinking tea out of the top of a butter dish and the other one out of the mess tin. I'm getting towards the end of this video now. I just want to talk about the amount of money there was available. I don't want to labour the point, but there was a lot less disposable income around, so that walking on mountains was actually a niche market. I've got a picture here of the 1971 Black's Catalogue, the picture of the page on anoraks. You'll see there are only 3 anoraks. That's all there are available for the whole of the walking fraternity in the Black's Catalogue. While I'm actually on that page, you'll see they've started selling a cagoule, which was revolutionary, because up until that time the advice had been don't wear waterproof clothes. I got my first mountaineering book was by Shoal Stiles, and he said, note that windproof, not waterproof, is the operative word for this outer clothing. An absolutely waterproof garment is useless in wet weather on a mountain because of the vast amount of condensation caused by your body heat. This will soak your inner clothing in an hour or 2. I think the implication was that you got wet and warm and dealt with it. I've got 4 original items left from our trip. First, there's the Ordnance Survey map. This is the one for Kinder, or the Huddersfield map. A badge, which I think we bought from the village shop in Kirk Yetholm. There's my youth hostel card with the 6 stamps from the youth hostels on it, and interestingly 3 of those have disappeared, although 1 has been replaced subsequently. And finally, there's a newspaper cutting I found when I cleared my parents' house out. That's it for this talk. Thanks for listening. Sorry it's been a desk-based episode. There's 1 more of these, unfortunately, before I actually get out onto the hills again. Thanks for listening anyway. Bye.